Hey everyone, welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into a massive 5,000-year journey that literally spans the entire globe. We're looking at the evolution of martial arts. We're going to see exactly how inherent patterns of human aggression and just raw battlefield survival transformed over millennia into the highly codified, globally celebrated sports and spiritual disciplines that we know today. It's a breathtaking story of human ingenuity, so let's uncover how this whole evolution happened together.
But before we get into the timeline, let me ask you a quick question. When you hear the term martial arts, what immediately comes to mind? For most of us, the assumption is that all organized martial arts strictly originated in East Asia, right? It's a super common misconception. But where did the very first evidence of an organized fighting system actually come from?
Believe it or not, the answer is ancient Egypt. Yeah, the oldest known artistic representation of an organized fighting system dates all the way back to 3400 BC. There's this fresco at Beni Hassan, and it shows incredibly detailed depictions of military training. You've got recruits practicing wrestling, calisthenics, and dueling with single sticks. It even shows fighters using a basket guard to protect their hands, and get this, a splint strapped to their left forearm to serve as a shield. It is absolutely fascinating to see just how far back these codified systems really go.
Okay, so let's dive into this. Here is the roadmap for our journey today. We're going to cover the universal roots of combat, ancient epics and early evidence, monks, warriors, and swords, the birth of karate, and finally, the shift from battlefields to modern sports.
Starting off with Section 1, the universal roots of combat. So, the truth is, combat didn't start out as an art. Not at all. It started as a biological necessity. Inherent patterns of human aggression and close combat optimization, well, they're cultural universals inherited from the pre-human stage. Many of the fundamental movements in martial arts aren't actually dependent on a specific tradition or era, they're fixed by the specifics of basic human physiology. Our ancestors simply had to fight to survive. Over time, as civilization developed, early humans began taking these innate, physiological survival skills and codifying them, practicing mock combat and eventually turning raw survival into an intentional art.
Moving on to Section 2, Ancient Epics and Early Evidence.
As these systems became more codified, early civilizations actually began writing them down in extreme detail. And this brilliantly illustrates the parallel development of combat across totally different regions. Like in Mesopotamia around 3000 BC, we see combat mentioned in the Epic of Gilgamesh. Over in China, the Spring and Autumn Annals from the 5th century BCE expounded on hand-to-hand combat theories, including concepts of hard and soft techniques. And in India, classical Sanskrit epics like the Mahabharata detail incredibly brutal unarmed battles millennia ago. They describe fighters boxing with clenched fists, utilizing kicks, knee strikes to the chest, and even headbutts.
So, the crucial point here is that early fighters weren't just randomly brawling, they heavily studied human anatomy. By the 4th century, the ancient Indian medical text, the Sushruta Samhita, identified exactly 107 vital points on the human body. And of those 107 points, 64 were classified as lethal if properly struck with a fist or a stick. This anatomical knowledge actually formed the basis of Ayurveda, which was taught right alongside various martial arts. They knew exactly how the body worked and, honestly, exactly how to break it.
That brings us to Section 3, Monks, Warriors, and Swords.
As we move into the Middle Ages, martial arts become deeply intertwined with monastic life and elite warrior castes. Looking at this era, we see incredible cross-cultural momentum. In 728 CE, we have the Shaolin Combat Stele, which proves Chinese monks were actively defending their monasteries. By 1156, the famous Japanese samurai class emerges, bound by the strict warrior code of Bushido. Around 1200, the incredibly acrobatic and ancient armed art of Kalari Payattu is established down in Kerala, India. And over in Europe around 1300, we get the MSI-33. That's the oldest surviving European martial arts manual detailing armed sword and buckler combat. We're seeing highly sophisticated, highly lethal systems developing all over the world simultaneously.
Now, it's fascinating to juxtapose this Eastern development with what was happening in Europe. Get this, in 1520, at a massive summit known as the Field of the Cloth of Gold, England's King Henry VIII was aggressively competing in Cornish wrestling matches. He even famously wrestled the French king Francis I. It just goes to show that grappling and combat were completely central to elite culture, even for reigning European monarchs.
Section 4, The Birth of Karate.
This is a really fascinating cause and effect story driven entirely by political oppression.
On the island of Okinawa, part of the Ryukyu Kingdom, indigenous unarmed combat called Tei was already being practiced. In the 1400s, Chinese experts arrived and their techniques began mixing with the local styles. But then, things got really tense. In 1477, King Shoshin banned the carrying of arms. Later, in 1609, the Ryukyu Kingdom was invaded and became a vassal state to heavily armed Japanese Satsuma samurai. Because the locals were strictly forbidden from carrying swords, groups of young Okinawa nobility had to secretly develop highly lethal unarmed combat systems just to resist and survive against these fully armed samurai.
What's really interesting here is the original meaning of the word itself. Karate originally meant Chinese hand, which is a direct nod to the blend of Chinese influence and local Okinawan resistance techniques. Early on, this secret art had absolutely no formal uniforms, no colored belts, and no unified ranking systems. All of those modern elements, they were added less than a century ago. It was purely an underground survival necessity developed by bare-handed fighters facing down armored oppressors.
Which perfectly brings us to our final section, from battlefields to modern sports. So, what changed? Why aren't we still fighting with swords and staffs on the battlefield today? Well, around the 1500s, the widespread use of firearms fundamentally diminished the need for traditional hand-to-hand or armed fighting in warfare. As the battlefield changed, so did the arts. We see a pretty stark contrast here. The bloody, lethal origins of these practices evolved. In Korea and Japan, for instance, they transformed into paths of spiritual growth. The Japanese concept of Budo actually translates to the martial way, focusing on leading the practitioner toward a spiritually fulfilling life, inner peace, and physical health, rather than just teaching them how to dispatch an enemy. Today, we can distill the sheer massive variety of global martial arts by categorizing them into these distinct, easy-to-understand technical buckets. You've got your striking arts, like Muay Thai and Karate. You have grappling arts, which focus on throws, joint locks, and ground fighting. Think Judo, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and Olympic wrestling. And you still have armed arts, preserved mostly as sports, like Japanese Kendo or modern Olympic fencing.
In the 20th century, these arts just exploded globally. During World War II, experts like Fairbairn and Sykes blended jiu-jitsu and boxing to teach Allied special forces lethal close combat. Then, the cinematic boom of the 1970s and 80s, heavily influenced by Bruce Lee and Hong Kong cinema, completely transformed global perception. It captured the public's imagination and drove millions into martial arts dojos. Finally, all of this paved the way for the modern rise of mixed martial arts, or MMA, where striking and grappling styles are stress-tested against each other on a massive global sporting stage.
Which leaves us with this final provocative thought. How incredible is it that ancient systems, forged in the brutal fires of lethal warfare and desperate survival, have evolved into the ultimate global tools for preserving cultural heritage, building physical health, and finding deep personal peace? It really just shows the incredible capacity for human growth. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and I hope this sparks your curiosity to look even deeper into the martial arts world.